Hello, my friends. Good night and welcome to Honovi Global Network, where clarity and accountability is indeed the order of the day. So it's quite obvious that the sensationalism created by Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz's interview is not going away. And Candace Owens has wisely inserted herself into the mix. But tonight we are going to provide some clarity on the issue and some accountability by Tucker Carlson, Ted Cruz, and Candace Owens. So stay tuned for tonight's episode of Contradictions and Sensationalism. So when Tucker Carlson had that interview with Ted Cruz, it was quite obvious that from the get-go, he was setting him up and laying a bunch of traps, and Ted Cruz foolishly fell for many of them. I don't even believe that Tucker Carlson anticipated that he himself was opening himself up to some sort of reaction to what he was about to say. So it's quite obvious that throughout the interview, Tucker Carlson took a very simplistic approach to an America First MAGA policy. In a world of critical political alliances and ever-increasing interconnectivity, it will be foolish for any one nation to pursue a path of pure isolationism. And that also includes America. America initially tried that prior to World War II and realized eventually they had no choice but to get involved. So for Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens to expound and believe in some sort of puritanical MAGA First, America First policy is just sensationalist nonsense. America First and MAGA does not mean pure political isolation. And it definitely does not mean disconnecting yourself from critical alliances throughout the world. If you look at America's foreign policy throughout the ages, you would realize that intervention, military, political, or otherwise, is critical to the survival of the empire. It is important that certain things have to be done behind closed doors and through back channels for the essential preservation of America's foreign policy and foreign interests. Any unschooled politician would understand that. So Tucker Carlson started off with some sort of naive, simplistic questioning of Ted Cruz's support for Israel, as if it is something so strange or abnormal or something that shouldn't be. So after decades of cooperation between Israel and America, all of a sudden, Trump should come in as the MAGA boss and deconstruct those relationships as if that would be a productive path. All of this contention could have been avoided if Ted Cruz was just politically and intellectually honest in his discussion with Tucker Carlson. Sometimes in politics, you don't have to be deceptive. You don't have to be tactful. You don't have to be diplomatic about what you say. So Ted Cruz could have just said, look, Israel is an ally, and there are many people who look out for the interests of Israel, and they support my campaign, and they support my political career. And I think I have an obligation because of that support to also support Israel. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I'm sure the reverse works. I'm sure there are American financiers. I'm sure there are American groups that support political parties in other nations. And those parties are sometimes pushing America's interests. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that because every nation does it in some form or the other. But instead, things always get mucky and conflated when you delve into the realm of theology. And that is where the mistake lied. When Ted Cruz decided to use his support for Israel and explain it because of some biblical theory that he claimed he learned in Sunday school. That was a problem. And Tucker Carlson pounced and says, the people in the Bible that is referred to as Israel are not the people today in the state of Israel, which again is a bunch of sensationalism.
Growing up in Sunday school, I was taught from the Bible, those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. And from my perspective, I want to be on the blessing side of things.
Of those who bless the government of Israel?
Those who bless Israel is what it says. It doesn't say the government of, it says the nation of Israel. So that's in the Bible. As a Christian, I believe that.
Where is that?
I can find it to you. I don't have the scripture off the tip of my. You pull out the phone and use the Google.
It's in Genesis. So you're quoting a Bible phrase. You don't have context for it and you don't know where in the Bible it is, but that's like your theology?
It's like saying that the Greeks who took early Christianity from the early Christians, promoted it throughout the Mediterranean, and then it was adopted by a Christian Europe. And guess what? It was spread all over the world. So are you saying that the people that might have subsequently converted to Judaism in Europe are not Jews? It's just nonsensical. It's like saying, and we can talk about the current conflict between Israel and Iran. It's like saying the Persians who adopted Islam are not Muslims. What are you trying to say, Tucker Carlson? A matter of fact, we see it across religions. The people who convert to a particular religion are usually more ardent supporters of that religion than the people who were born into the religion. What about the Turks who converted to Islam and created great empires in the name of Islam? Are they any less Muslims than the Arabs who introduced Islam to these people? So now we realize that argument by Tucker Carlson, as much as it's sensational and as much as many people ran down the rabbit hole with that argument, now we realize that it's nothing but sensationalism. And of course, wisely, Candace Owens injected herself into the whole debate. And of course, some may argue and legitimately argue that America should always look out for America's interests. But how do you know that looking out for America's interests does not mean supporting Israel's interests in the Middle East? It's quite possible that the two may intersect at some point. It's not like America is just pursuing unilateral policies with Israel in the Middle East. America's foreign policy in the Middle East is multifaceted. There's several relationships. There's relationships with the Gulf nations to protect certain interests. There's relationship with Saudi Arabia to protect other interests. There's relationships with Turkey to protect certain interests. There's also relationships with Jordan. There's also relationships with Egypt. It's multifaceted. So as you can see, America's relationships and foreign policy in the Middle East is multifaceted. And I'm sure after having, to a certain extent, neutralized Iran's nuclear program, I'm sure there'll be certain relationships that would be established with Iran. But I understand and I sympathize with Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens. They're not politicians. They do not understand the complexity of the issues that exist in the Middle East, especially when it comes to foreign policy. And of course, I understand they have to be a little more sensational to garner more views and to make it interesting for their podcasts. So you see Candace Owens is playing the victim card and said, look, all this heat is coming on me now. And even the pastors in churches are trying to encourage their congregants to go against me. So there's some sort of conspiracy all of a sudden to go after Candace and Tucker Carlson.
On Sunday, people went to church, whatever church it is that they attend, whatever denomination, and there were a flurry of pastors that preached to their congregation regarding the evils of, you guessed it, Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens. Again, why are we in the same breath?
Some of you listen to Tucker Carlson and Candace Owens, and these guys are anti-Semitic. I don't care what anyone says. I'm going to say it. They're anti-Semitic.
Well, what do you guys thought? What do you guys thought was going to happen with all that you've said? Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson have to woman up and man up and realize that if you make certain statements, then obviously people are going to retaliate with statements of their own. Now, let me make it clear. I don't believe that they're anti-Semitic, but they're obviously not pro-Israel. And that's okay. And one should obviously understand that because of the history of Christian persecution against Jews, there is an attempt naturally at redemption and overcompensation to take the side of Israel. And that is understandable. So I think Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson would have been naive to think that they would have said what they have said and don't expect some sort of consequences or some sort of response or some sort of reaction to what they have said. And don't get me wrong, I do understand what Tucker Carlson is trying to say. But I believe that Tucker Carlson took a very simplistic view of MAGA and the whole America First policy. Again, let me reiterate, America First does not mean America's isolation politically. It would be counterproductive and dangerous if America First policy means America's political isolation and we're not going to get involved in anything except it's something domestic. So get this straight. Let's clear this up once and for all. Candace Owens and Tucker Carlson, that America First policy, MAGA policy of America First, does not mean, will never mean, America isolating itself politically in the world. There are established relationships throughout the world that America has that would not change. And it's not in the best interest for those relationships to change. Those relationships has been built upon decades of interaction and cooperation. They have worked and they have been beneficial to the foreign interests and foreign policy of America. So of course, when Candace Owens went on Piers Morgan and went into some sensationalist tirade and didn't even give the man a chance to speak, and she was a guest on his show, and don't get me wrong, Piers Morgan is not my favorite guy. And then she asked this question, oh, well, how has a relationship with Israel benefited America? And again, of course, it's simplistic and naive. And there's so many things that are probably happening behind the scenes that she may not understand, I may not understand, and the public may not understand in terms of that relationship that is beneficial. And Piers Morgan sat there like he was being schooled when he could have easily refuted a lot of what she said. Of course, like everything else, a couple of things need to be tweaked. But I believe the clinks in the chain are being worked out. Keep in mind, history and politics are an ever-changing dynamic. And just to divert a little, as we're talking about history, don't you find it interesting that the Persians, who were responsible for the return of the Jewish people from Babylon back to Jerusalem, and today, Israel and Iran are arch enemies. Isn't that interesting? Anyone who knows a little bit about history would remember the Achaemenid dynasty was responsible, who overtook the Babylonians, was responsible for bringing back the Jewish people who were moved to Babylon and restoring them back to Jerusalem and allowing them to rebuild the Temple of Solomon. Isn't it interesting that while Christian Europe was so against the Jewish people, that in the Ottoman Empire, Muslim Empire, the Jews and Christians were allowed to practice their faith and tolerated more than any other empire. So that, my friends, gives you a little taste of the contradictions in history. But all is not dismal and all is not lost. I mean, we've seen major progress made, especially under Trump in his last administration, where a lot of the Arab states have actually made peace with Israel. And throughout the ages, things seem to be coming more and more closer to some semblance of peace. So there is hope amidst all of the chaos and all of the destruction and all of the enmity. And on that note, we'll end it tonight. Thank you for looking at Honovi Global Network, where clarity and accountability is indeed the order of the day. Good night.